This is the MyHeart.net podcast. This show is produced by Dr. Philip Johnson in conjunction with VitalEngine.com. Please welcome your host, Dr. Alain Bouchard, a cardiology specialist of Birmingham, Alabama, at St. Vincent's Medical Center, part of Ascension.
Welcome to MyHeart.net series on healthy lifestyle, an excerpt with our interview with Dr. Martha Gulati, who's professor and director of preventive cardiology at Cedars-Sinai. She's the associate director of the Barbara Streisand Women's Heart Center. And today, we'll discuss fueling wellness, nutrition as the cornerstone of a healthy lifestyle.
You know, when we tell our patient, listen, Mr. So-and-so or Miss So-and-so, your BMI is 35 or even 40, we need to lose weight. Well, you know, that's another one, like saying you need to quit smoking. It's easy to say, not easy to do. How do you actually walk through with your patient? You're in the office. How do you get them started? Or someone that really wants to lose weight, how do you approach that?
The best approach is obviously with a dietitian. I will tell you that most of us as physicians, we might have been lucky if we had 1 or 2 or 3 lectures on diet. And I was trained at University of Toronto where we actually had one of the best persons who researches diets on faculty there. And we were lucky. We did get a fair amount about diet, but we don't come out really equipped to tell people. I think this is one of the failings of medical school, but that's a different conversation. But I think if you can be lucky and partner with a dietitian, that can really help. Unfortunately, in the US, the only way a dietitian is generally paid for is if you already have diabetes, which I would say that's too late. I mean, definitely they need help with their diet, but we should be more proactive and more pro-prevention. And if you have chronic kidney disease, then you can get the dietitian involved. Otherwise, you have to pay for the dietitian. Now, the good news that has happened during this pandemic is there's so much availability online, and even consulting with a dietitian virtually is one of the many options that can be very cost effective and give you a kickstart. But, it's certainly something to consider. But I think in general, if the only person you can go to is a cardiologist or your primary care physician, you should ask them for information. Now, I did want to make a plug for CardioSmart. We have some information on cardiosmart.org. It's free to anyone. And at least there's some information and resources there that can lead you to other resources about diet. So that's one place you can go. The American Heart Association has some great information. What we need to do is chat first about, well, what do you eat? And one of my first questions I ask people, everybody actually gets asked this in my clinic, is I ask, what did you eat yesterday? That's my diet recall. And usually the way the conversation goes is this. They say, oh, but yesterday wasn't a typical day. Now, if it was your birthday, I might forgive you. But otherwise, you start realizing that the not so typical day is actually their typical day. So I literally want to know, what did you eat for breakfast in detail? Drank as well, snacks. What did you eat for lunch? Then snacks, and then dinner. And if there's an evening snack or dessert, I want it all. I write it down, and I at least get it's almost like taking a picture of my patient. And at least there we can start saying, okay, well, if just every day you replaced, say your bacon and eggs and waffle, maybe we can change that to oatmeal. Maybe that's the only thing we change right now. Significant calorie reduction, greater fiber intake, and we talk about where is the places that we can make these little changes. That can be the start of helping them change their diet. If person has to be engaged with that, but I always bring it up. Well, when at the end of my visit, regardless of why anyone's there, can there be any lifestyle changes we can do together? And what do we want to focus on? And I try to keep it to one change per visit, because I know if I write down everything, they're not going to do it. It'll seem overwhelming. But making one change is a reasonable thing, because when you make that a habit, if you start with that, then the next time you're more willing to engage with, okay, what should we change? I have patients who come in, okay, what are we changing at this visit? And then we find something. So I think that can be a helpful way. I know that you probably want to talk a little bit more though about like, I think the biggest thing out there is like all the diets that are out there. And I always tell people, I don't really want anyone on a diet. I just want you to eat healthy. So that terminology that we use, what diet is the best, I hope everyone realizes that we're not talking about even weight loss. Just what should you be eating when we're saying, Mediterranean diet or DASH diet. We're just talking, what should you be eating? Not that we're putting you on a diet to help you lose weight. If you're trying to lose weight, then we should talk about the calories that you're eating and within any changes we're trying to make.
Well, I think that's really good. The portions that the patients eat, finish your plate like your mom, taught you when you were a kid. And now we're really trying to tell them, why don't you just eat 80% of what's in your plate, and try to maybe obviously have more healthy choices. What's on the plate is important too.
And little things that you can do, even, changing. A lot of us are, I don't know if people ever look at their grandmother's china. They'll notice that the dining plates were actually quite small. And now we go to Crate and Barrel and these other stores, and the plates are just massive. They often don't even fit in your cupboards. Like, so, depending on when's the last time you modified your kitchen, if it's been a while, you'll realize the bigger plates in the older cupboards, they don't shut. You have to be very creative about how you place them. And one of the tricks that you can simply do to reduce what you're taking in is use your smaller plate. So use either your salad plate instead of the big dining plate. It's probably not that much smaller than what would be the original dining plate of what people used to eat on. But now we're just so used to these massive quantities. And again, on the resources we have at CardioSmart, we talk about what portion of your plate should really be vegetables, and if your protein, where that should be, and the other parts of your meal. And just following some of these simple tricks, you can almost fool yourself that you're full because you ate that whole plate. I think another thing that we do very wrong, and I talk with my patients about this, is where do they eat, especially their lunch and maybe their breakfast. If they eat it on the go versus actually sitting down, it makes a big difference to feeling full. And I think we're all guilty of it. I mean, I know how many lunches I've eaten at my desk, and I'll doing multitasking, doing lots of other work. And am I full? I don't even know if I realized what I ate for that meal. So simply taking out the 10 or 15 minutes, whatever you need, to sit down, drink a proper glass of water before you eating your food, enjoying it. I think the French know how to do this better. They actually enjoy the meal, the socialization, who they're sitting with, and they enjoy their food. And it's partially about the food, but it's not portions like we eat. And so just trying little tricks can help you consume a little bit less. Not eating in front of the television is another thing that, I try to get my patients to think about this, so that they make it more about the meal and looking at their food, appreciating their food, and not eating, but not even noticing the amount they ate. And that, I think, can be a lot about simply reducing your calorie intake, which ultimately weight loss is about trying. We always say this expression, you can't outrun a bad diet. And you really can't. You can exercise a lot, but I'll tell you, if you take in more calories than your body needs, you'd have to run or do whatever exercise for many hours, sometimes for the 3,000, 4,000 calories that people are putting in per day into their life, even with just the, Starbucks and coffees that are so sweetened. those are, if you just simply get rid of those or just go to black coffee or something like that, you can make a big difference to how many calories. Sodas is another one where just wasted calories, where I'd rather get those from food. And you just need to be talking with your doctor, and kind of keeping a record can really help you go, gosh, what am I eating? Like, when you keep track, a lot of these apps on our smartphones and stuff, when they're good is they're counting every calorie from what you eat. And if you truly just follow for a week and enter all your food, you'll stop eating bad things, because you'll realize that, like MyFitnessPal, you can scan every food you're eating and it knows the calories. And you realize, oh gosh, if I eat this whole thing, like how many calories it would be. And you're like, okay, even you stop eating the whole chocolate bar, or, even sometimes certain things you'll be like, oh, I don't need that as much as I need whatever I wanted to eat tonight. So that's their science behind them, is just being aware of the calorie intake.
A very good point. I think here in the U.S., we nationalized the buffet food, all you can eat for $5.99. Can go twice, 2 helpings, 3 helpings, as well as very large portion, So obviously, we're not going to talk about all the diets here, but, there's the Mediterranean diet, the DASH diet, the vegetarian diet, and then you have like these keto diets, Atkins diet, which, was kind of back then, of course, poor Dr. Atkins, died of a heart attack. Just because, it was like, low calorie, but, bad food. So what is the advice we could give our patient in terms of healthy, diet? How do we advise them to eat healthy? I mean, what's in the Mediterranean diet, for example, that is so good?
Yeah, so the recommendations from the American Heart Association, which were put into the prevention guidelines that came out in 2019, were that either a plant-based or Mediterranean diet were the ones that they recommended. And, that generally means, if we're talking a Mediterranean diet, fruits, vegetables, nuts, legumes, lean proteins. So whether it's vegetable or animal protein, preferably fish, would be the ideal diet. And then insoluble vegetable fibers that are ingrained in that kind of diet as well. The Mediterranean diet specifically also emphasizes the use of olive oil. The plant-based diets are good too. There's a lot of studies on those as well, but the strongest ones for the Mediterranean diet, like the PREDIMED, is one of the studies that randomized participants either to the Mediterranean diet that was supplemented either with olive oil or nuts. And when they supplemented with either of those two, along with the Mediterranean diet, we saw about a 30% reduction in having a heart attack, having a stroke, or dying from cardiovascular causes. But in general, it seemed that it was really driven primarily by a reduction in stroke. So that really gave us a lot of information. I think that also when we looked at plant-based studies versus animal protein, like the 2 protein sources, there's the Adventist Health study, and they looked at that using meat as protein versus plant. And what they saw was those people who got the protein from meat, there was actually about a 60% greater increase in dying from any cause. Compared to those people who had it from, took their protein from plant-based formats. And there's other studies as well, but I think those are the ones that I really recommend when patients ask, what should I be eating? Or what kind of diet plan should I be eating on a daily basis? Now, there's the DASH diet too that I'm a big fan of, and especially for people with high blood pressure. It's very Mediterranean-like, although it has a little bit more focus on, it also allows dairy intake as well. And a lot of people think the DASH diet also had low salt, but actually the DASH diet in and of itself was really about what you were eating. And high fruits and vegetables, high potassium containing vegetables was the recommendation in the DASH diet. And when people followed that, it was specifically looking at did it have the ability to lower blood pressure? And it really had a great effect. And then if you added to the DASH diet reduction in sodium as well as the DASH diet, you got an even more profound effect on lowering the blood pressure. So I think that those are the ones that I really recommend to people based on what can they do. I'm plant-based. And when I say plant-based, I think that even the Mediterranean diet's plant-based. It's just making a decision if you're going to go all plant-based, which, might mean vegan, versus just adding more plants to your food. And I am pro plant-based for all my patients because I want them to get in some plants into their diet. And like I said, I ask everyone, what do you eat? And you'll be amazed at how many people don't list any vegetable in that day snapshot, or maybe one vegetable, and that's all they get. And that's not what we're recommending people really eat. They need way more plants in their diet. So I think everyone needs to be plant-based. It's just a question of what can you do in terms of your choices, in terms of your protein sources, maybe substituting for healthier. If you're going to eat animal products, I have no problem with it. But maybe you can consume fish sometimes, and maybe you can consume lower fat meats. I think that's where we need to work with. Now, for you mentioned the other diets that are out there, and I think they're so important to talk about because we get these questions all the time about Atkins, the ketone diet, I'm probably forgetting the Ornish diet, and what are the benefits, what are the pros, Esalen diet as well. There's been a lot of hype about that as well. And so let me first go to they're all extreme diets, but the Ornish diet and the Esalen diet is no fat. And so one thing I will tell you, it's very hard for people to adhere to. I would say the data is very much lacking in those two. I know when you look up Dr. Ornish's diet, I don't mean to trash his diet because he's published a lot, but what he published is, to me, not enough to convince me that it's the right diet. So one of his studies had, I think, 43 patients enrolled in his study. 20 were not in his diet arm, 23 were in his diet arm. Highly motivated group in that 23 group. Took them a lot of people to find before they got enough that were going to be compliant. Very different type of people, too, in the two groups. And then he said that he found a difference with using quantitative coronary angiography, that there was reversal of disease. That reversal of disease was 0.001 millimeter. And we don't use, as you know, you're the interventionalist, not me, that we don't use quantitative coronary angiography. So yeah, back in that day when he did those studies, I don't know if we were using IVUS. We certainly weren't using it as frequently, but now I would say that's the way to really detect disease. And he touts that his diet is the only diet out there that has proven reversal because he had a statistical significant finding. I don't buy it. And I think the other thing is it's very hard, small numbers, but very hard for patients to adhere. And I would argue it's a big marketing tool. So hopefully he doesn't listen to this. But then the same with the Esalen diet is, again, very hard to adhere. And it contradicts these big studies. He's not done a study, but these big studies with the Mediterranean diet, Lyon study, I could quote so many different studies that have shown us that we can have improved outcomes with the Mediterranean diet. So I don't think that eliminating olive oil is a good thing. I don't think eliminating avocados and fish from your diet is a good thing. We need some of those fats, and there's some fats that are good for us. And I think the saturated fats, we can all agree, are not good for us. The trans fats, we can all agree, are not good for us. The other diets that everybody definitely talks about, though, are the keto diet right now. South Beach, also known as South Beach diet, is one of them. The Atkins diet, I would argue, was a similar one, where they were trying to show that a low carb diet or a high protein, but actually it was a really high fat diet, improves outcomes. We don't have data showing that it improves cardiovascular outcomes. It may accelerate weight loss in the short term, but even that is of some debate. There was just a beautiful study that was put out it was published. I know maybe the senior author was Kevin Hall from the NIH, and it was published in Nature. And how many times do you see a diet study in Nature? But he did this elegant study where people didn't even know what kind of study they were in. He wanted to just see the biochemistry effects of basically a keto diet versus a low-fat diet that was plant-based. And the people that were on the low-fat plant-based diet, even though the weight loss was not the goal, and actually they consumed a lot of calories because they were brought every meal. And so they, when it's in front of you, you might eat it. They could certainly not eat. There was no push on them to eat or not, but they had to bring them the food. So there was a high calorie intake. The people that lost weight were this was a crossover design. When they lost weight, they were more likely to be on the plant-based diet than the keto diet. So, it's not consistent with what I think people think. But if people need a kickstart to their weight loss and they really think that the keto diet's going to do it, then, for people with cardiac disease, especially, I always warn them that the biggest problem with that is the amount of fat that you end up taking based on those strict diets. If you maybe modify it a little bit and get high protein from plant-based food, that might be a better choice, or from things like fish. And it just really depends what you're doing. But it's I think I actually have someone for you that you should really have a great diet discussion about all these diets, because I think it is very interesting. And a lot of what I think our patients hear is the marketing out there trying to get people to be on these diets. And again, when we're talking about the Mediterranean diet, I'm talking about a lifestyle. So you can have a bad day and, on your birthday celebrations, things where you eat something differently. But if most of your days is following the Mediterranean lifestyle, you will actually do better. You really will, because that's what we've seen in our studies. And diet studies are the hardest to do because you have to collect everything on everything that they eat. And these diaries that we collect are very difficult and they're imperfect at best. But when you see that even with them being imperfect, and you see these great reductions in cardiovascular events and mortality, it's impressive.
I think we have something in the South. We don't have a very good diet, in the South. Southern cooking and having a lot of processed meat and processed food, a lot of fat and everything. So I think if we could avoid the processed food and the fat containing in them, the fried food, the added fat, the organ meat that we see here, the sweet into everything, sweet tea and so forth, which is just kind of markers of Southern diet, which is really increasing the prevalence of obesity, diabetes, and heart disease.
Yeah, definitely. There was a study called the Regard Study, which specifically pointed out that the Southern diet plan, or, the dietary pattern that they have, was identified at the greatest risk. They had a 56% greater risk for heart disease, a 30% greater risk of stroke. And the pattern that they saw in the South was more fried food, more added fats, more organ and processed meat, and those sugar sweetened beverages. And those were the things that they ultimately, after that study was done, saying that, we just need to figure out for the people that live in the southern areas, how to modify the food that you enjoy and make, but make it healthier. So, maybe like if you make fried chicken, for example, could you bake it? Now there's these great air fryers. They can make anything look like it's fried and actually have the crunchiness that sometimes our mouths like to have that texture. So that's one thing. I'm not a big fan of diet drinks per se, but I will say that a diet drink is better than a sugar sweetened drink. So if you have to substitute and go that way first, and then you can figure out if you can get away from it altogether. But making little modifications to the diet, particularly in the South, can be a huge game changer.
So is the diet drink like vaping?
Yes.
That was a great study that you mentioned. That was actually at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And that was done kind of a long time ago, and with very, very great findings. So it looks like the American Heart Association got rid of the food pyramid, and now we're talking about this plate. So could you tell us a little bit about, what's on the plate that we would recommend to our patients? You mentioned obviously a lot of good ingredients, but what are the categories that we put on the plate?
Yeah. So one thing is we emphasize a diet that is rich in vegetables, fruits, legumes, nuts, whole grains, and fish. That we have evidence that those things, all of them have evidence that they decrease the risk of cardiovascular disease. Our next thing that we recommend is that we replace saturated fats with monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats, and that we should have a diet that's got a reduced amount of total cholesterol, as well as a reduction in sodium can be beneficial to reduce your risk of heart disease. And then as part of that healthy diet, we also recommend a reduction or minimization of processed meats, refined carbohydrates, and sweetened beverages. And the last thing in our recommendations from diet is that as part of a healthy diet, you eliminate trans fats, that those should be avoided. We know that the data is strong that trans fats increase the risk for cardiovascular disease. And they're supposed to be listed on every food. We now have updated food labels on the things we buy. So they are they're on every food. And if you see that word trans fat, I would just put it back. And that comes from, I'm not sure if that's what you were talking about, but that's from our prevention guidelines, our 5 sort of ways of talking about diet. I have a big problem with the food pyramid. It's just heavily influenced by industries that lobby, and not that the government isn't trying, but I think it's just so heavily influenced that every time we see a food pyramid come out and they're not willing to say don't consume sugar, or they're not willing to move a bit away from the risks related to meat, from specific meats, we have a harder problem with that, with the food pyramid.
We can see that nutrition plays an important role as a healthy lifestyle, and certainly the Southern diet with high sugar and animal fat, just think of sweet tea and pork rinds, is really not the best way to lose the weight and staying healthy. But if you imagine yourself living in Italy, where you eat plenty of fruit and vegetable, and your fat is olive oil, it can have a significant impact on reducing heart attack and stroke. Our next podcast will discuss the effect of exercise on healthy lifestyle and prevention of heart disease.
To learn more from our team of cardiologists, please visit us at MyHeart.net. You can also follow us on social media by searching MyHeart.net on Facebook and Twitter. And be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss our next episode.